G'day there, and welcome to our first ever exercise tutorial here at Pilates with Dan. We'll be focusing today on a bit of a classic exercise that we use in many of our classes. But we've picked on it today because this next series of tutorials is all about the hips and pelvis and how to get some better strength and movement in those areas. The exercise is known as clams or clamshell, and what I want to present is the idea that I don't want to sort of focus on some of the aspects of the clamshell given by other modalities. Quite often it's used to help reduce pain in the lower back or the knee. I'm more interested in just actually moving the hip joint itself. So the movement itself is a lot of external rotation of the hip joint, and it targets one of the gluteal muscles, mainly gluteus medius. Okay, so this is definitely good for if you've got a little bit of instability in that area, telling it to switch on, and maybe just exploring the movement and seeing how it feels in your body. In a lot of our classes that we teach here at Pilates with Dan, we quite often use a couple of different positions. And the reason again is just to explore the range of motion that you naturally have in your hip and seeing if we can actually improve the function and movement potential of that area. Because it's an area that's quite commonly targeted for people with a lot of issues with their pelvis and hips and knees and low back pain. We don't tend to delve into that here. We're looking more at just how to move the joint and presenting a few options to help increase your capacity, basically. All right, so the setup itself is you're going to be lying down on your side. And the first position that we're going to just have a look at is a sort of a 90 degree at the hip joint, 90 degree at the knee joint position. We call that here clams number one, which is very imaginative, I know, but it's just a nice shortcut to get everyone moving in the same way. Okay, now you just want to support your head and neck, and sometimes you can use a pillow underneath your head here. The idea is we want to try and keep the spine fairly straight from side on. Now the other thing that's very interesting in this movement is actually what's happening through the midsection here. So quite often I cue people to keep long through this top hip. The idea here is that as you're going through this movement, I don't necessarily want the pelvis to move around a lot. I want the focus to be on the hip joint itself. Okay, so the movement itself is a rotation of this thigh, the femur, inside the pelvis. Okay, so we've got that rotational movement and coming back down. Now I want you to watch out for, when you're practicing this one, is not letting the pelvis roll backwards. Okay, so the pelvis itself is staying still. The other thing to watch for is that the space here between your ribs and the pelvis, as you rotate, make sure that doesn't collapse. Okay, so we're looking at a very stable pelvis and exploring the range of motion. Now, where I am feeling this is at the back of the hip towards the butt. Okay, rotating there. Okay, and the number of reps in classes, we quite often do reps of 10. Okay, and you can certainly do that at home as well. But we're looking at quality of movement, not necessarily quantity, especially first up, okay? And particularly if something like this is very new to you. Okay, now the second position, we're going to keep the knees bent at 90 degrees, but just bring the feet back so that they're in line with the spine. Okay, what this does is just changes the angle in the hip joint. So remember, we're just exploring ranges of motion through the hip. And it's a rotation there. Slightly different sensation than I'm feeling, okay, but still working that same area. Again, keeping an eye to keep the pelvis steady. Good. So that one we call Clams 2. Again, very imaginative. Now the third position is we're going to bring that top leg back. So the foot comes back behind the bottom leg. Again, all we have done is just change the angle slightly in the hip joint. Now, as you're going, if you're practicing these ones, what I'd like you to do is be able to complete a set of Clams 1 before moving on to Clams 2, and be able to complete a set of Clams 1 and Clams 2 before doing Clams 3. The idea here is that you're just actually building up, nice and slowly, your strength and your range of motion as you're going, okay? And as you can see, these is all unloaded work. So we're just looking at ranges of motion and how your body responds to that. Once you're able to do that, the next advancement is to use something like a thera-band to provide resistance, okay? And so we're looking at range of motion with building strength, okay? So using a thera-band, you can actually just wrap the thera-band around your legs just above the knees. Okay, and going back to Clams 1, holding on to that thera-band, and all the thera-band is doing is providing resistance as you go through that range of movement. Okay, and for some people, they can actually feel it much more intensely there. If you've got a history of bursa problems or tendinitis or those sort of inflammation issues, be able to actually do the first 3 unloaded before adding a load, and check what tension your thera-band is, and maybe use a little bit less tension to start off with. Okay. Then the third advancement that we will be talking about during the upcoming workshop, and also in the term of mat work classes, is a more open chain sort of movement. So you're mimicking the positions here, but now I've got no reference. Okay, so it's much more open chain. Okay, so here we're adding a little bit more control to the movement, and you can actually repeat that in all 3 positions, trying to get that work into the hip joint itself. Okay, and then after doing all that work, have a lie on your back and do a little pretzel stretch just to make sure it's nice and happy. Okay, good luck.